something on my radar. Looks like a fog bank, and it's moving straight toward us.
What kind of fog moves against the wind?
Elizabeth? What's wrong?
I keep seeing horrible things happening.
The town of Port Sorrow wasn't built near the fog. It felt like the town was built out of it. It was a dense, wet, bone-chilling presence that rolled in every afternoon, smelling of salt and something metallic like old blood. I came here as a historical researcher, hoping to document the abandoned lighthouse that sat a mile down the coast, notorious for the disappearance of its last peeper in 1968. I rented a small, isolated clapboard cabin, one of the last structures before the trail met the jagged cliffs. It was charmingly decrepit, filled with that specific damp scent of old wood and forgotten things. My host, an elderly woman named Mrs. Thorne, gave me the key and a single piece of advice. Keep the windows shut when the fog comes, dear. It likes to look inside. I dismissed it as local superstition, but I followed her advice anyway, mostly because the air was so cold. My first 3 days were uneventful, filled with archival notes and weak coffee. The keeper, Elias, had gone missing during a massive, unexpected fog bank that lasted 4 days. The official report said he likely fell into the sea. The local whispers, which I read about in Mrs. Thorne's Old Town History booklet, suggested he was taken by the watcher. On the 4th afternoon, the fog rolled in earlier and thicker than usual. I was organizing my notes when I spotted it on the mantelpiece, tucked behind a chipped porcelain figurine. It was a small, crudely carved wooden doll, maybe 6 inches tall. It wasn't a toy. Its limbs were stiffly jointed with thick twine, and its head was smooth and round, featureless save for 2 small, dark stones jammed into the wood for eyes. It was utterly unsettling. "Where did you come from?" I muttered, picking it up. It was heavy, the wood worn smooth by decades of handling. I tried to recall if it had been there before. It hadn't. I dusted the mantelpiece just yesterday. I placed it back down, this time on the right side of the mantel, facing the interior of the room. I went back to work, but the atmosphere had changed. The fog outside pressed against the window panes like a thick gray blanket, muffling every sound. I checked the time, 3:17 p.m. I glanced back at the mantelpiece. The doll was now on the left side of the mantel, and it was facing the window. A cold knot tightened in my chest. It wasn't a gentle move. It looked purposeful, like someone had picked it up and repositioned it. I told myself I must have been mistaken about where I put it, or maybe the floorboards had settled and caused it to slide. But the floor was solid, and the movement was too dramatic. I walked over slowly. The stone eyes of the doll seemed to catch the meager light. I reached out and picked it up again, examining the joints. They were stiff. It would have taken effort to rotate its head or move it across the wood. "All right, show me," I challenged it softly. I set it back on the right, facing the room, and drew a thick chalk line around its small wooden feet. Then I went into the kitchen, keeping the door open so I could see the living room mantel. I busied myself making tea, watching the doll from the corner of my eye. Maybe 5 minutes passed. I heard a small, almost imperceptible scrape, like wood against wood. I dropped the kettle and rushed back into the living room. The doll was sitting just outside the chalk outline, and it was facing the window again. The window, now entirely obscured by the sickly, gray fog. I grabbed the phone. I had to call Mrs. Thorne. This was no prank. The cabin was too remote. "Mrs. Thorne, it's Alex at the lighthouse cabin. I need to ask about something, a wooden doll?" There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated only by a crackle of static that seemed to mirror the sound of the fog outside. "The fog watcher's doll," she finally said, her voice thin. "You shouldn't have touched it, dear. Elias used to keep it. He claimed it was the only thing that could see the fog when it came." See it? But what is it doing? It's moving to face the window. It's not facing the window, Alex. It's facing the watcher. The fog isn't just water vapor, not here. It's a boundary. And that thing, it's what pushes against it. Elias carved that doll as an offering, a way to keep its attention, to keep it outside the walls. I swallowed, glancing at the doll sitting innocently on the mantel. What happens if it comes inside? Elias went out to stop it from coming inside. He felt it was his duty. That's why he vanished. When the doll starts to face the window, it means the watcher is interested in what's in the house. You need to keep it facing away. I hung up, my hands trembling. This was crazy. But the evidence of the chalk line was undeniable. I walked to the mantelpiece and tentatively moved the doll to face the back wall of the cabin. For the next hour, I didn't move. I watched the doll, ignoring the relentless drumming of the damp fog against the glass. The silence in the cabin was oppressive. I was beginning to relax when I heard the scraping sound again. Sharp, unmistakable. The doll had rotated. Not all the way to the window, but 45 degrees, towards the narrow, unused hallway leading to the cabin's attic staircase. My blood ran cold. The attic wasn't boarded up, but the access door was old and sealed shut with layers of paint. I stared at the doll, then at the foggy window. It was interested in the attic now. Was the watcher trying a different entrance? I crept to the hallway, my footsteps loud on the wooden floor. I looked up at the painted-over attic hatch. Everything was still. Then, from above the hatch, I heard a sound. It was a single gentle tap, like a finger lightly tapping dry wood. My breath hitched. I backed away, running into the living room. I turned, and the doll was now facing the window fully. It was sitting slightly past the chalk line. Panic seized me. I rushed back to the mantel, snatched the doll, and tried to spin it back around. As my fingers closed around the smooth, cold wood, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Around one of its stiff twine joints, there was a thin, dark stain. It looked wet, like ink or old blood. Just as I turned the doll to face the back wall, the light in the cabin flickered and died. Total darkness, save for the faint gray glow from the windows. The fog had blocked out the last of the sun. In the sudden, heavy silence, the sound from the attic hatch returned. This time, it wasn't a tap. It was a slow, deliberate scratch, running the length of the hatch door. I backed up until my shoulders hit the cold stone of the fireplace. I held the doll tight, my knuckles white. The scratching stopped. Then, a sound came from the window directly in front of me. It was a single wet thud against the glass, followed by a faint, heavy dragging sound on the roof just outside the window. I didn't look up. I couldn't. I just kept the doll pressed against my chest, facing the back wall, praying Mrs. Thorne was right, that the doll's attention meant the watcher's attention. A dragging sound moved slowly, agonizingly, across the roof directly over my head and stopped above the attic hatch. Scratch, scratch, thud. Then, a new sound, a quiet, heavy exhalation right above the sealed hatch. It sounded deep and utterly deprived of breath. It was the sound of something waiting. I spent the next 2 hours frozen in that spot, the doll a cold weight in my hands, listening to the muffled, wet sounds of the thing above me, breathing the cold air of the attic. Finally, long after midnight, a stiff sea breeze must have kicked up. The fog began to thin. The pressure on the window eased. The sounds from the attic faded. By dawn, the fog was gone. I walked out of the cabin, the sun already warming the damp wood. I drove straight to Mrs. Thorne's house. I placed the doll in her mail slot and left, never looking back at the coastal town. I'm far away now, but I still follow the weather reports for Port Sorrow. Sometimes the news mentions a particularly dense fog rolling in, one that lasts for days. And every time I hear that, I wonder if the doll ever returned to the mantelpiece, and which way it was facing when the darkness came. I hope someone else remembered to keep its attention away from the windows. I hope they remembered to keep it away from the light.